So what is this keyword all about? What are we doing? How does it work? And what does the arrow syntax solve for us? What does it mean when it says that there is no binding of this? Well, let's have a look at what this all means. Well, let's start at a very simple constructor function. Remember, with a constructor function, the value of this is bound to the newly created object being created. And this makes sense, right? Well, let's create a person constructor function where we set this name equal Wally. And remember what the second step was with a constructor function? It was to use the new keyword. That's right. And when we do that, when we say let user equals new person, what we're actually doing is the value of this is being bound to the newly created object. So that means when we refer to this in our function call, this is referring to the user, the newly created object. And if we console log user out, we can see that we've now set this name property, which is name of user, to Wally. So that makes sense. You know this. But now let's dig deeper. Let's now set a timer using set interval. And set interval is an inbuilt JavaScript function. We'll see how it works now. So let's comment this out so we don't get conflicting variable names. And again, let's define a person function. And let's say this first name is Wally. And now what I want to do is I just want to say, before we even go and use Wally, I just want to console log hi every 1 second to the console. How would we do that? Well, let's define a method called display. And we'll make that equal to JavaScript's inbuilt set interval. And you can see my IDE has already picked it up for me. Set interval. So how set interval works is you've got to have parentheses. And you can see my IDE is already saying that the first argument has to be our handler. In other words, it's going to be our function that's called every second. So let's just have a function. Let's call it show. We can call it whatever we want. It actually doesn't matter in this instance. And we want to console log to the screen hi. That's all we're going to do for now. And the second argument in this set interval function, and if I just put a comma, my IDE already tells me it's the timeout. It's how many seconds do I want to lapse before this function gets called again. And this is in milliseconds. So 1000 milliseconds is 1 second. And there you have it. Here's our function. What's going to happen though when we create a new object and we execute this? Let's have a look. So let user equals new person. And what I'm going to do now actually is I want to put this in Google Chrome's console. It's just going to be easier for us to see the results of this. So here you go. Here's our console. So all I want to do is I want to copy this function. Let's go to our console and let's paste it in here. And what's going to happen now is every second hi is going to be displayed to the console. And you can see that's exactly what's happening. It's what we would expect. But what happens if we wanted to display the first name, Wally, every second? Do you think we could do that here? By the way, in case you're wondering why this is being executed every second, just take a step back and think about what it is we've done. We've defined a constructor function. We've then defined a new user, and we have executed this constructor function. The problem is with the set interval is that when the parser goes through it and executes it, it never stops. We haven't ever defined it to stop. It just is going to continue indefinitely. Anyway, getting back to the point at hand, what happens if we wanted to display not hi, but hi Wally? So we wanted to access the first name. Well, your first thought might be, okay, cool, let's just use template literals and go in console log and go hi, and we log out this first name. Right? Kind of makes sense. Let's see. Let's copy this function. Let's go to our console again. Stop this and clear the console. Now let's paste our newly created function. What's going to happen? Hi undefined. And this is the point I'm trying to make with function expressions. This set interval method is just a normal function. There's nothing special about it. But what's happening is that this keyword is being set to the global object. It's not being set to the newly created object. It almost ignores the current scope it's in, and it just references this as to the global object. And let me prove this to you now. Let's go back to our console. And now, remember how I said that within this function expression, the this keyword, when we use that function expression, it's referencing the global object? Well, let me prove that to you. And to prove that to you, all we need to do is get rid of, actually, let's get rid of the whole console log and just console log this. That's all we're doing. And let's copy that expression and let's paste it in Google Chrome. Now what's going to happen? There you go. This is the window object that's being consoled every second to the screen. Okay, back to the console. So we are back in the console and we know what the problem is. We don't want this to be bound to the global object. We almost want this, well not almost, we do want this to be bound to the original context. We don't want it replaced by anything else. And that is exactly what we mean when we say the arrow syntax does not bind this. So say now we want this to be bound in its original context. This is the whole point of an arrow syntax. So let me show you. Instead of having this syntax function show, let's replace it with arrow syntax. So we don't need the function and we don't even need to name it. All we need is the opening and closing parentheses and the arrow. That's the only change we need to make. Now if we copy this function and we paste this in the browser. This is still going from our previous example. Let's refresh the page, clear the console, paste this function in there. What's going to happen now? This is perfect because now we are console logging the newly created user object. And let's just stop this again. Let me refresh the page, clear the console. If we go back here, now we are able to use literal syntax and we can say, hi, this first name. And if we copy this, paste it in our browser, we should get hi Wally every single second. How amazing is this? And I hope it's sunk in that this is what the arrow syntax is doing. If we go back to our console, there's just one more thing I want to show you. Another way to prove that this is pointing to the person object is within our function expression here, after we define first name or even before, it doesn't matter, we can just say let scope equal this. And what we can do is we can console log scope equal to the this keyword. Do these two equal? And again, let's copy this. Let's paste it in our console. Let's just clear it first. Paste it in our console and we should get true. And we do. So there you go. There you have it. We've gone in depth as to what this means and the arrow syntax and how it impacts the this keyword. I hope you've had fun.